If someone ever truly felt you, not the version you show, but the version you hide, would you stay or would you run? There is a reality no one prepares you for before you get close to someone who feels deeply, not in any honest way. You might have heard that they are emotional, that they experience everything more intensely, that they require reassurance or depth or understanding beyond what most people are used to. But what almost nobody explains is this: being close to someone like that can completely rearrange you. It can shake your sense of self in ways you didn't know were possible. And the reason has nothing to do with weakness, fragility, or neediness. It has everything to do with what happens when they truly let you in. Because when they do, they don't just notice you, they experience you. Not on the surface, not in the way people usually interact, but on a level that reaches beneath your personality, beneath your words, beneath the version of yourself you've spent years constructing. They connect with the part of you that you rarely show anyone, the part that exists under your defenses, under your roles, under everything you've learned to perform. And when someone meets you there without judgment, without pulling away, without using it against you, something inside you shifts. For some, it feels like relief they've been waiting for their entire lives, like finally being able to breathe after holding everything in for years. But for others, it feels terrifying, because being seen at that level means there's nowhere left to hide. And when that happens, people either open in a way they never have before, or they leave before they have to face what's being uncovered. That's the truth behind why these connections feel so intense. Not because they destroy people, but because they expose them. And most people spend their entire lives avoiding that kind of exposure. If we're honest, most conversations about emotional depth get it wrong. They paint the deeply feeling person as overly sensitive, as someone who absorbs too much, as someone who needs protection from the world. And while there's a piece of truth in that, it completely misses what actually makes them powerful. Because the real impact isn't just what they take in, it's what they awaken in others. What happens to you when you're around them is the real story. Because when a genuine connection forms, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. Your body starts responding to their presence, not because of anything dramatic, not because of grand gestures or perfect words, but because of how fully they show up. Their attention isn't divided. Their presence isn't half there. And that kind of focus creates a sense of safety most people have never experienced. And in that safety, your guard starts to drop. The layers you didn't even realize you were carrying begin to soften. The parts of you that are usually hidden start rising to the surface, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. And what comes up is not the polished version of yourself. It's the real one. For some, that feels like freedom, like finally being able to exist without pretending. But for others, especially those who have built their identity around control, around image, around never being fully known, it feels like a threat. And this is where confusion begins, because people think it's chemistry. They think it's timing. They think it's something rare or cosmic. But in reality, what they're experiencing is what it feels like to be truly seen, maybe for the first time in their life, and not knowing how to handle it. And this isn't just emotional or abstract. There's something happening beneath the surface. When you feel safe around someone, your brain starts shifting. Chemicals associated with trust and bonding begin to increase. The part of your mind that constantly monitors how you appear to others starts to quiet down, and the part connected to your authentic sense of self becomes more active. In simple terms, your mind stops performing and starts being. And when that happens in front of someone who responds with warmth instead of judgment, the experience becomes deeply imprinted. It stays with you. People who feel deeply often create this environment naturally, not because they're trying to, but because of how they exist. Their ability to stay present, to notice subtle emotional shifts, to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. All of that signals safety, and safety is what allows real connection to happen. That's why these relationships move quickly, why days feel like months, why conversations go deeper than expected, why silence feels different, why closeness feels different. It's not magic. It's what happens when two nervous systems align in a way that allows vulnerability to exist without fear. And when vulnerability is met with acceptance, the bond that forms can feel almost identical to love, no matter how short the time has been. But there's another side to this, because once you've been seen like that, going back to shallow connection feels impossible. And if the person doing the seeing is also absorbing every emotional shift, every unspoken tension, every subtle change, it becomes something complex to manage. This isn't a light experience. It requires awareness. It requires skill. It requires understanding what's actually happening beneath the surface. Because the word dangerous isn't about harm. It's about stakes. It means something real is on the line. And in this kind of connection, what's at risk is your identity. The story you've built about who you are, what you deserve, how you function in relationships, all of it gets challenged, and not everyone is ready for that. So here's where it becomes practical. Every person carries an emotional baseline, a default internal state that shapes how they experience everything. Most people aren't aware of it. They think it's just reality, but it's not. It's a frequency. And people who feel deeply tend to match the emotional state of those around them without trying to. It's not about agreeing or adapting behavior. It's something deeper, something automatic. When they spend time with someone, their internal state begins to sync. Breathing patterns align. Emotional tone mirrors. And because this happens unconsciously, it can be confusing for both people. The person who feels deeply may start experiencing emotions that don't seem like their own, and the other person may feel exposed, yet drawn in at the same time. This matters more than most people realize, because whatever exists inside someone, unresolved pain, suppressed emotion, unprocessed experiences, begins to surface in this kind of connection, not because it's being forced, but because it can no longer stay hidden. If there's openness and warmth, the connection feels incredible. If there's buried pain, it feels overwhelming. If there's fear of being known, it feels threatening. And that's why the same person can feel safe to one individual and overwhelming to another. It's not about who they are. It's about what each person brings into the connection. For those who feel deeply, understanding this changes everything, because it allows the me to separate what belongs to them from what they're picking up from someone else. And that distinction is powerful, because without it, everything blends together. Every emotion feels personal. Every shift feels internal. And over time, that leads to confusion, exhaustion, and loss of identity. So the practice begins with awareness before any meaningful interaction. Pause. Notice your internal state, feel your body. Identify what's already there. Then after the interaction, check again. What changed? What stayed the same? That awareness creates a boundary. It gives you a reference point. And over time, it becomes easier to recognize what's yours and what isn't. This becomes even more important in close relationships, because the deeper the connection, the stronger the emotional blending. Without awareness, it can feel like losing yourself. And many describe it that way, as if they disappeared into the other person, as if they forgot where they ended and the other began. That kind of intensity might feel powerful in the moment, but it's not sustainable. So the goal becomes clear. Depth without losing yourself. And that's where another pattern appears. The connection starts strong, intense, almost instant recognition. Conversations go deep quickly. Everything feels meaningful, different. And then something shifts. The other person begins to pull back, not dramatically, subtly, slowly. And the one who feels deeply senses it immediately, And instinctively, they try to restore the closeness. They give more attention, more presence, more effort. But instead of fixing it, it pushes the other person further away. This dynamic has a name, and understanding it changes everything. Because once you see it, you stop taking it personally. And instead of chasing, you return to yourself. You invest your energy back into your own life, your own growth, your own stability. Not as a strategy, but as a necessity. Because your sense of self cannot depend on someone else's presence. And when you do this, two things happen. The cycle breaks, and you remain whole, no matter what the outcome is. And that's what real connection requires. Not losing yourself in someone else, but standing fully in who you are while choosing to connect. Because when depth comes from wholeness, it becomes something beautiful. But when it comes from need, it becomes something heavy, and eventually that weight shows. The ones who navigate this best are not the ones who feel less. They are the ones who stay grounded while feeling everything, who can open without disappearing, who can connect without abandoning themselves. And that leads to the final truth. The quality of every relationship you experience reflects the relationship you have yourself, not your attractiveness, not your communication, not how much you give, but how deeply you know and honor your own inner world. Because many who feel deeply learned early on that their value came from understanding others, from adapting, from sensing, from giving, and over time that became who they believed they were. But the cost of that identity is that their own needs became secondary. Their own voice became quiet. And in relationships, that silence becomes the problem, because the one who understands everyone else often struggles to ask for what they need, not because they don't have needs, but because somewhere along the way they learned it wasn't safe to express them. And this is where everything changes, because real connection requires not just seeing someone else, but allowing yourself to be seen fully, honestly, without shrinking. And that means learning to speak your needs clearly, directly, without softening them into something smaller. Start small, in simple moments, and with practice, it becomes natural. And each time you do it, you reinforce something new, that your voice matters, that your needs matter, that your presence matters, because the depth you bring into the world was never the problem. It was always the gift, but without grounding in yourself. That depth turns into something that consumes instead of connects. And real connection, the kind that lasts, the kind that transforms, requires both. The courage to truly see someone and the courage to let yourself be seen. Not just the easy parts, all of it.